Right now, as you watch this, the United States military is conducting what it calls Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest sustained bombing campaigns since the Second World War. Iran's supreme leader has been killed. Its nuclear facilities have been destroyed. Its military infrastructure is being systematically dismantled. Oil prices have surged past $100 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage through which 20% of the world's entire oil supply flows, is being contested by Iranian warships and U.S. Navy destroyers. Stock markets are falling. Global shipping is grinding to a halt. Governments across the Middle East are closing embassies and bracing for consequences they cannot fully predict. And almost nobody who is watching this conflict on the news actually understands the country at the center of it. This video is going to change that. This is the real story of Iran. Not the Iran of today's headlines. The Iran of 2,500 years of history. Empire, collapse, occupation, revolution, survival, and the slow, deliberate accumulation of a kind of power that is very hard to destroy. By the end of this video, the war you're watching will make a different kind of sense. You need to start in 550 BC. That is when Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, built the first world superpower in recorded history. 2.9 million square kilometers. The Achaemenid Empire at its peak, the largest empire the world had yet seen, stretching from Greece to India. Cyrus didn't just conquer. He issued what many historians regard as the first known declaration of human rights, the Cyrus Cylinder, granting conquered peoples the freedom to practice their own religions and return to their homelands. This was not sentimentality, it was a governing philosophy. An empire that absorbed rather than erased its subjects lasted longer. For 2 centuries, the Persian Empire was the framework within which the known world operated. Its roads connected 3 continents. Its postal system was the most sophisticated on Earth. Its administrative model became the template for empires that followed, including Rome. Here is what most Western history classes miss entirely. When you study the ancient world through a Greek lens, as most Western education does, Persia is the villain. It's the empire that attacked Athens. But from the Persian perspective, which is the perspective of the 85 million people currently living in Iran, Persia was the center. Greece was a distant fringe. The empire eventually fell to Alexander the Great in 330 BC, then to Parthians, then to Sassanids, then to Arab Muslim armies in the 7th century AD. But here is the crucial thing. The language survived. The culture survived. The identity survived. When Arab armies swept across the Middle East in the 7th century, they conquered Egypt, Syria, and Iraq, and those countries became Arabic in language and identity. Iran adopted Islam but kept Persian. The language, the poetry, the philosophical tradition, Rumi, Hafez, Omar Khayyam, all continued in Persian. Iran was conquered. It was not erased. And the distinction matters deeply to how Iranians understand themselves. In the 16th century, something happened that permanently changed the geopolitics of the entire Middle East. The Safavid dynasty made Shia Islam the official religion of Iran. Most of the Muslim world is Sunni. Shia Islam is a minority branch within Islam. Approximately 10 to 15% of Muslims worldwide are Shia. But in Iran, it became the dominant and defining tradition. This mattered geopolitically for one critical reason. It gave Iran a permanent theological distinction from its Arab Sunni neighbors, especially from the Ottoman Empire to its west and later from Saudi Arabia. Iran was surrounded by Sunni powers. It was always the odd one out. And out of that position of difference came a particular kind of identity: proud, suspicious of outsiders, resistant to assimilation, and deeply conscious of its uniqueness. I want to ask you something. Does that description, surrounded, different, suspicious of outsiders, fiercely proud, remind you of any other country you know? Think about that as we continue. In 1908, British engineers struck oil in southern Iran. It was the first major oil discovery in the Middle East, and it immediately transformed Iran from an interesting ancient civilization into one of the most strategically valuable pieces of territory on Earth. Founded 1909. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later renamed BP, was the direct product of British oil interests in Iran. For decades, Britain kept the majority of profits. The arrangement was, by any objective measure, exploitative. Britain took the lion's share of the revenue from Iranian oil. Iran received a small royalty. Iranian workers labored in the fields. British managers lived in gated compounds. By the early 1950s, an Iranian prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh decided this arrangement was over. Mossadegh was elected on a single platform: nationalize Iranian oil, return Iranian resources to Iranians. He was enormously popular. He was also, by any contemporary standard, a Democrat. He believed in the rule of law, free elections, and parliamentary government. In 1951, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Britain, predictably, was furious. It imposed a blockade and lobbied the United States to act. Here is the fact that has defined U.S.-Iran relations for 70 years, and that most Americans have either never been taught or have forgotten. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran. They removed Mossadegh, a man who had committed no violence and broken no international law, and reinstated Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a monarch who would rule with increasing authoritarian control for the next 26 years. Operation Ajax, 1953. The CIA-led coup that overthrew Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh. The U.S. officially acknowledged CIA involvement in 2013, 60 years later. In Washington, the 1953 coup is mostly a historical footnote, if it is remembered at all. In Tehran, it is the foundational wound. It is the proof, repeated in every political speech, every school curriculum, every revolutionary slogan for the next 70 years, that the United States cannot be trusted. That when Western powers talk about democracy, they mean democracy only when it serves their interests. This is the fact that John Gazvinian, in his comprehensive history of U.S.-Iran relations, calls the original sin of the relationship, the moment that set the two countries on a collision course. The Americans largely forgot it. The Iranians never did. The Shah that the CIA reinstalled was not entirely a puppet. He had his own vision, a modernized, westernized, secular Iran that would be the dominant power of the Middle East. He invested oil revenues in infrastructure, industry, and education. He gave women the right to vote. He launched a land reform program. By the 1970s, Iran had one of the fastest growing economies in the world. 10% Iran's annual GDP growth rate in the early 1970s, among the fastest in the developing world at the time. But he also ran a secret police force called Savak, trained by the CIA and Mossad, that tortured and disappeared political opponents. He grew increasingly distant from his own population, governing in an atmosphere of corruption and repression. By the late 1970s, a deeply strange coalition had formed against him. Leftists, liberals, nationalists, and Islamists, all united only by their opposition to the Shah. and at the head of the Islamist faction was an elderly cleric in exile who had spent 15 years organizing from Paris and Iraq, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. On February 1, 1979, Khomeini flew back to Tehran from Paris. 5 million people lined the streets to greet him. Within months, the Shah was gone. The U.S. Embassy was seized. 66 Americans were held hostage for 444 days. The Islamic Republic of Iran was declared. What happened next surprised almost everyone, including many of the revolution's participants. Khomeini was not interested in a liberal democracy or a secular republic. He had a specific ideological framework, Velayat-e-Faqih, or guardianship of the Islamic jurist, which held that a supreme religious scholar should govern the state. It was a political theory with no real precedent in Islamic history. The liberals, the leftists, the nationalists who had helped make the revolution were gradually pushed out. Some were imprisoned, some were executed. The Islamic Republic consolidated into a theocratic system with Khomeini and later Ali Khamenei as supreme leader. Roy Motahedeh, whose book The Mantle of the Prophet is considered one of the finest accounts of this transformation, argued that the Islamic Revolution succeeded not simply because of Khomeini's charisma, but because Shia Islamic tradition and Iranian nationalism had become almost inseparable. The revolution wasn't just religious. It was a civilizational rejection of Western dominance that had been building for 130 years. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran. The United States, alarmed by the Islamic Revolution, quietly supported Iraq throughout the war. It provided Saddam with satellite intelligence, agricultural credits, and diplomatic cover, even after evidence emerged that Iraq was using chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians. 500,000 to 1 million estimated Iranian deaths in the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. It was the bloodiest conventional war since World War II. The war ended in a ceasefire in 1988 with no territorial change and catastrophic losses on both sides. Iran had to swallow a settlement that Khomeini himself described famously as drinking poison. But the war left something behind that would define Iranian strategy for the next 40 years.
It left the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, was founded in 1979 to protect the revolution from internal and external enemies. During the Iran-Iraq War, it grew into one of the most powerful military organizations in the Middle East. But it is far more than an army. The IRGC controls a significant portion of the Iranian economy: construction, energy, telecommunications. It runs its own intelligence services. It operates its own diplomatic channels through the Quds Force, its external operations arm. Afshan Ostovar, in vanguard of the Imam, the most comprehensive study of the IRGC, describes it as a state within a state. It answers to the supreme leader, not the elected president. It has its own foreign policy. It has funded, trained, and armed proxy forces across the Middle East for 4 decades. The lesson Iran drew from the Iran-Iraq War was this: if you fight a conventional war, you will be outgunned by any superpower or regional power with American backing. If you want to survive, you need to fight differently. Through proxies, through asymmetric tactics, through strategic depth. $16 billion plus estimated annual Iranian financial and military support for proxy forces. Hezbollah, Houthi rebels, Hamas, Iraqi militias, at peak in the 2000s. The result of that lesson was what Iran calls the axis of resistance, a network of allied militant organizations spanning Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Gaza. Hezbollah in Lebanon, founded with Iranian support in 1982. Today, it is more powerful than the Lebanese army. It has over 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. The Houthi movement in Yemen receives Iranian weapons and tactical support, demonstrated its capacity in 2024 by disrupting shipping through the Red Sea for months. Hamas in Gaza received Iranian funding for years, though the relationship has been complex. Iraqi Shia militias, dozens of armed groups with Iranian backing that effectively control significant parts of the Iraqi state. This network is Iran's strategic deterrent. It is how a country with a GDP smaller than the Netherlands projects power across a region of 400 million people. If you were Iran, surrounded by hostile powers, betrayed by the United States in 1953, attacked by Iraq with American support in 1980, and watching the US destroy governments in Afghanistan and Iraq at will, would you not build exactly the same network? The question is not whether Iran's methods are acceptable. The question is whether they are rational. And the answer, strategically, is yes. There is a single point about Iran that most mainstream analysis misses. Iran's power is not primarily military. It is geographic. Iran sits at the intersection of three of the world's most strategically vital regions: the Persian Gulf, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. It shares borders with Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkmenistan. But the single most important geographic fact about Iran is one number. 20 to 21% of the world's total seaborne oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow 33-kilometer wide passage between Iran and Oman that Iran borders on its entire northern shore. Every major oil consumer on Earth, China, Japan, South Korea, India, Europe, depends on oil and gas passing through a passage that Iran can, and periodically does, threaten to close. Iran has never fully closed the strait, but the credible threat to do so is itself a strategic weapon. Oil markets respond to that threat alone, as we are seeing right now, with crude prices surging above $100 a barrel since the war began. This is what is called the choke point doctrine, the ability of a geographically positioned power to hold the global economy hostage, not by closing a route, but simply by making closure plausible. Iran does not need to win a war to win strategically. It needs only to make the cost of fighting it too high. Iran sits on the fourth largest proven oil reserves on Earth and the second largest natural gas reserves. 157 billion barrels, Iran's proven crude oil reserves, fourth largest in the world, plus 1,203 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, second largest globally. Under sanctions, Iran's oil production has been significantly constrained. But even under those conditions, even when the United States has done everything in its power to strangle Iranian oil exports, Iran has found ways to sell. China has been the primary buyer of sanctioned Iranian oil, often through third country intermediaries at heavily discounted prices. Iranian crude has flowed to Chinese refineries throughout the sanction periods, providing Beijing with cheap energy and Iran with enough hard currency to survive. The relationship between Iran and China is one of the most underreported strategic partnerships of the 21st century. $400 billion value of the China-Iran 25-year Strategic Cooperation Agreement, signed in 2021, covering oil, investment, infrastructure, and military cooperation. when the US strikes Iran's Karg Island, which handles approximately 90% of $400 billion value of the China-Iran 25-year Strategic Cooperation Agreement signed in 2021, covering oil, investment, infrastructure, and military cooperation. When the US strikes Iran's Karg Island, which handles approximately 90% of Iranian crude exports, it is not simply attacking Iran's economy. It is directly affecting China's energy security. And China's response to that is something the world is now watching very carefully. 40 years of US-led sanctions have seriously damaged the Iranian economy. The Iranian rial has collapsed. Inflation has been endemic. The middle class has shrunk. Brain drain has been severe. Approximately $385 billion Iran's GDP in 2022, roughly the size of the Netherlands, despite being the 17th most populous country on Earth and sitting on the world's 4th largest oil reserves. The gap between what Iran should be economically, given its resources, and what it actually is. That gap is the price of 40 years of international isolation. And yet, the regime has survived. For 40 years, Western policymakers predicted that sanctions would produce either regime change or capitulation. Neither has happened. The reason, analysts like Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute argue, is that the Iranian government has become extraordinarily skilled at managing economic pain, concentrating suffering on the general population while protecting the elite networks of the IRGC and the clerical establishment. The uncomfortable truth about sanctions, and this applies far beyond Iran, is that they tend to hurt ordinary people more than the governments they target. Iran's rulers have survived 40 years of maximum pressure. Iran's middle class has been destroyed by it. That asymmetry is worth holding on to when the next debate about sanctions happens. Why Iran wants nuclear capability? To understand Iran's nuclear program, you need to understand the world from Iran's perspective. As of 2003, that year, the United States invaded and destroyed the government of Iraq, a country that, as it turned out, had abandoned its nuclear program. In the same year, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program in exchange for Western engagement. He was killed by a NATO-supported uprising in 2011. Meanwhile, North Korea, which the United States also called part of an axis of evil, kept its nuclear program. North Korea has not been invaded. The lesson many Iranian strategists drew from these cases was explicit and was stated openly. Countries without nuclear deterrence get regime changed. Countries with them do not. It is not irrational. It is the rational strategic response to a pattern of US behavior that has been consistent across 3 administrations. Whether you agree with that calculation is a different question from whether it is logical. Iran has maintained that its nuclear program is for civilian energy purposes. Western intelligence agencies, at various points, have assessed that Iran has not made the final decision to build a weapon. But it has enriched uranium to near weapons-grade levels, enough for multiple weapons if further processed. 408 kilograms Iran's stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% purity as of May 2025, near weapons grade. Enough for multiple nuclear weapons if further enriched to 90%. In June 2025, the United States and Israel struck Iran's nuclear facilities at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, using B-2 stealth bombers with bunker buster bombs. Iran retaliated. A fragile ceasefire held for several months. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a far larger operation, targeting not just nuclear facilities, but Iran's entire military and political leadership. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed. Dozens of senior IRGC commanders were killed. Iran's response has been to widen the conflict across the entire region, striking U.S. military bases in 6 countries, targeting civilian infrastructure in Gulf states, launching drones and missiles at Israel, and restricting Strait of Hormuz shipping. As of this video's publication, the war is ongoing. Its final outcome is unknown. But here is what we do know, and what the history in this video makes clear. Iran has been preparing for exactly this scenario for 40 years. The proxy network, the asymmetric tactics, the geographic leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, the willingness to absorb extreme punishment and keep fighting. None of this was improvised. It was built systematically by a government that genuinely believed this war was coming. What happens to the world if Iran falls, or doesn't whatever happens to the Islamic Republic? Whether it collapses, whether it negotiates, whether it fights to a draw, Iran, the country, and Iran, the geographic reality, will remain. The Strait of Hormuz will still exist. The oil will still be there. The 85 million Persians with their 2,500 years of civilizational memory will still be there. If this video gave you a frame for thinking about Iran that the news can't, subscribe. This channel exists for exactly this. The research-backed, full-context version of the stories that matter most right now.